Hello everybody, deluxeicoff here, bringing you my tokens deck. Long time ago it was known as White Life, probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even more. But with Battle Screech and such, it's evolved, so I'm going to try to bring you some cool commentary, come in and out once in a while. I mean, who wants to look at my ugly mug, right? So without further ado, here's the deck.
Tron is by far our worst matchup, and by worst I mean we tend to play even with it. It's kind of a coin toss if they've got the big kaboom spell. You obviously are the aggressor here, and you want to cast your Guardian's Pledge as fast as possible. The life gain's only relevant against the typical big red spells. Cenn's Enlistment plays a lot of dividends in this game, as you can see right there. When we're sideboarding against this, we definitely are more concerned against the big red spells. We're going to bring in all of our Prismatic Strands, as well as some Lumithread Fields. Obviously, Suture Priest don't have any place in this deck because they don't really have that many creatures, and our life gain's already good enough. The Rune of Protection is just extra backup to draw. The Lumithreads come in for, electricity tech, depending on the list you can see, and maybe losing 1 or 2 Journey of Nowheres, because other than Olmog's Crusher, we're not too concerned about stuff. Okay, so we start off right again with a mulligan. We got a pretty bad hand here. Gonna try to bait some stuff out. There's one. Here comes the other. And I just want to set up an insurance policy with the Lumithread Field. One of the better enchantments, because it's the only thing that is a creature that can turn into an enchantment at instant speed, netting you about 1.5 cards if it's played right. Obviously, most people see it coming a mile away, but you gotta take what advantages we can get. Obviously, I feel a little bit more weak with Battle Screech in this state, not having a big backside, and it's a very good sign when they're flame-slashing bird tokens or other creatures, because it kind of lets you know what's in their hand. They obviously don't have Electricity if they're spending a spell for that, so it's kind of a neat way of looking into a person's hand. Yeah, here's a nice scenario. I started drawing, finally top-decking some decent cards. Now this is an interesting build with Justice. Obviously I like that his life is getting low, and at this point I don't need this Rune of Protection, so I'm going to cycle it away and try to stay aggro, because so far I haven't seen any big red spells. That's something we don't like to see. Olmog's Crusher. Usually our life gain is supplanted by the fact that they can reduce our permanence to such a degree, unless we have our Anthem effect to nullify things, but typical of many of my critics out there, I tend to top deck well. I always blame it on good deck design, but what are you going to do? But still, the board doesn't look quite good here. Drawing nothing but lands. Don't remember, do I have Cenn's Enlistment in my graveyard? No, I don't. There are many variations of Tron, and it's kind of hard to put somebody on one. So game 1, play a lot of Reconnaissance. Here I'm just hoping to blow past for air power. Maybe he'll feel a little frightened, and he doesn't. So I've got a block. I'm playing to my outs here. I've got to draw. And I don't. So here's the last game. This one's much more of a blowout. Again, Prismatic Strands serves double duty here. We've got token backup, and in case some super fast Tron Crusher shows up, we've got the Journey to Nowhere. So this is looking pretty good. The gaining of life is kind of irrelevant here, just after more of the bear quality. And I respect the deck enough to hold back on Prismatic Strands. I'm coming forward here, waiting for that Electricity bait. It doesn't show up. Yeah, so this one's over, and it's off to the next round. White Weenie's a very interesting deck, and obviously this is a version of it. Traditionally, this Tokens has a wonderful matchup against them because you just go so wide versus their quality that you can usually just chump block and fly through the air, which you'll see here. I get a pretty ridiculous Journey to Nowhere beginning here, and I'm able to really hold them at bay and just keep pecking at them through the air. Sideboarding in this matchup really comes down to Prismatic Strands, like a lot of other ones like Hexproof. You're looking for that fog swing, and Prismatic Strands gives you like kind of a 4-for-1 feeling as far as the effect and the output there. Yeah, we see he's got too much equipment, not enough creatures. Just cut him on a bad draw. And now we go for the kill. And sometimes this can feel like a very aggro deck when it does draw this way. Now, again, like sideboarding, a lot of these cards aren't going to do us any good. Prismatic Strands sure will. They might get off to a fast start. We might get screwed on something. I like orders in a lot of matchups, so I don't take them all out. Obviously, Suture Priest is good. Raise the Alarm might be a little bit redundant with the ground and pound that we got going on. Don't look to be too much of the aggressor, but I do like the sideboarding options there. So this is game 2. Again, every card's going to start netting us just some crazy amount of life unless the Javelineers show up. Out comes Squadron Hawk. Mostly pull that play right there because I want to draw a land, and the percentage of the deck increases if you do that. So here we kind of slow roll this. Skyfish is going to be a problem. We have to hold our journey for that. Depends. It comes at us pretty aggressively here. We're already at 17. The Order of Leitbur just serves double duty here against Stompy, against this, against even Kiln Fiend a lot of times. Really holding at bay. A lot of times people get a little punch drunk looking at the Protection from Black logo, and they think that's the only deck it's good against, but it's really good against ground aggro, I find. You can hold the fort with 1 mana up. Not many cards, you can say can do that. So here I'm going to use my Pledge as a removal spell, kind of cut things down. And again, he had a really good start, hitting us really hard, and after that swing, we're still up on life. And now it's almost like, we're starting the game fresh again. And with the Suture Priest out, sometimes people kill themselves with the damage on the stack, and it can be a resoundingly unfair matchup in those scenarios. Squadron Hawk's a really good card too because, well, for obvious reasons, but a lot of times early on you can draw extra ones and pitch a Prismatic Strands to your graveyard when normally White's weakness is not being able to discard outside of a Patrol Hound, which obviously you don't want to be playing. Yes, in the Desert Nomad, but come on. And this little Soul's Attendant is really irritating because I've right-clicked and saved as so many times I've lost count. Talk about a time sink. Oftentimes I'll be in a game and I've set all my stops properly and still it'll ask me. It almost seems like a bug at sometimes. And again, in this matchup, Doom Travelers are great. They're great against Stompy. You stop that block from turning into a flyer. They stop that Nettle Sentinel from flipping over the Pit Sulk and buying you a turn. My journey is going to definitely target the thing that can serve double duty and has vigilance. And he's prolonging the issue with a little bit of life gain on his end. And I actually had a version of this about 6 years ago that ran those for about a week or two briefly. Again, cards like Lumithread Field really allow a deck like this to just get abusive because unlike Veteran Armor, which I see a lot of people pick up my list and they change it right away, every single deck out there has ways of dealing with creatures. And if you're going to take away your entire fortification quality with something that your opponent has, I just think that's a bad strategy. Lumithread can feel broken many times. Points removal, you turn it into an enchantment. Like I said earlier, it's the only thing that can do that. And against black, they have no way of dealing with it, which is usually what you're bringing in for. So here we go with this. Next up is an old favorite of mine, Hexproof. Only played that for about 2 years straight. This guy's running the plant variant. And at first I was hoping he wasn't on Gond. Hex is a good matchup for us usually. Obviously if they have the nuts, then they can steamroll you. But we have so many flyers, we're usually able to clog the ground, or even a Silhana Ledgewalker in the sky, and do double duty. And also, even our journeys aren't dead here, because as you can see coming up, this is we're able to at least pick and choose the cards that problem cards, like the Gnarlid. Like I said, the air power can block Silhana outside of a really out of control turn with Armadillo Cloak. This one usually goes in our favor. And for the big benefit, I usually fear enchantment removal and over sideboard. And really all you need again against most aggro decks is Prismatic Strands. It's like bringing in 6 cards in 2, and just the bluff factor alone, leaving 3 up when you have other things to do with it at the end of turn, like raise the alarm and stuff. It can really throw people off. Here's an example again where Journey Nowhere is not dead against most varieties of the build. As you see, we get a quick concession. Again, like I was just saying, Powerhouse, often consider running 4 of those, but just a little redundant. I like to keep my first strike options open early on in the game, and they just simply don't have enough creatures to really punish them for playing the Suture Priest. And obviously, even way more so than Stompy, the absolute backbreaker is Standard Bearer. They just have to have an answer for that. And because of that, you know, in come a Lumithread Field to stop them from, whether it be Hornet Sting or Gut Shot or whatever they have. Unless he has an answer right now, this one's over. And now here comes our life. And we're going to be able to block soon. We're going to be able to block this turn. And as you can see, it gets the quick concession. So that's a good example of it. Believe me, there's times when hexproof can really run you over. So Angler Delver is the next deck up, and for the longest time I was like undefeated against this deck, and I think just the quality of pilots have gotten better with it. So I'm not as excited as I used to be, and I have a lot of respect for it, unlike some other people I see online that don't think it's a real deck. Even with Order of Leitbur main, they have some surprising resiliency. At least the latest builds do. I'm a little hopeful there. Countering life gain creature is a folly in my opinion against this deck, but who knows what they have. Maybe they're running low on shrivels, or it is game 1 after all. But again, that tells me if he's countering those little things, he probably doesn't have mass removal, knowing what deck I'm playing against. It's important deductions to make. It's like getting free duresses. And if they've got it, they're just playing poorly. And this is unlikely. I mean, we've seen 3 counter spells in a deck that maybe runs 5 or 6 tops, so looking good for late game. Now, Cenn's Enlistment here is just MVP. Again, you know, he's using the spot removal, so I know he's not holding a Visciar's Justice. I'm just trying to get quality turns out of my mana here, trying to play the aggro. I've already got another Guardian's Pledge backup. And here comes the big fatty, but unfortunately for him, the tempo doesn't pay off. I was really considering playing Cenn's Enlistment there, but who cares if it gets countered? You almost want it to pull a counter. And again, I'm just setting up turns. Always remember that Geist can't block ground creatures. I've seen so many replays with games where there's one guy holding off an army of ground troops, and it's like, just attack, read the card, people. Retrace again, I mean, over and over and over again. You cannot have this deck without that card, in my opinion. Almost want to run 2 of them. There are so many matchups where it's just backbreaking. Even when you're on the defensive and you got 1 or 2 life gainers out, every turn gaining, you know, 2 or 3 life, you can usually pull even with people. And then, you know, a few combat tricks later and you're off to the races. I can't remember what the record is on this one, but we'll get some air power going here. Start filling up our hand. Now I bet he wishes he had those counter spells. One thing too, when you're casting Squadron Hawk, if you have more than 1 in your hand, it's always good to hesitate, tap, act like you're worried. Don't play that extra land yet. Wait, draw the counter, and then play the land and maybe the second one. Because, you know, in a control player's eyes, they're stopping draw 3 cards. Again, no mass removal can be in hand with a play like this. At least a good play like this. And it's a losing battle when you're paying cards against tokens that I'm making 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 a turn. As you can see, got a concession. Now, Order of Leitbur is the MVP here, so much so I have it main, but like I said, because of most aggro things, their main thing is going to be able to shrivel us to get rid of the 1 toughness on Order of Leitbur. So obviously we're going to bring in all of the Lumithread Fields and the Suture Priests and go preach another day, because there's just not enough volume to represent them well. And that's it for the sideboarding on this one. Lumithread Field is just, you've got to get that out. One thing to stop shrivel. Even cause justice is nice, especially if you get multiples out. The biggest thing we're worried about here is nausea, shrivel, those sorts of effects. And it says a lot about the design of Magic that they're able to design cards like that and just kind of get around that thing. It's like, yeah, it's protected from black, but black card kind of killed it. Gotta love the game. Alright, so he starts off strong. Got a Ponder. I've got my good card. This is all I care about getting through, so hopefully he gets a little counter happy again. And I see my opportunity, I'm going to jump on it. Unless he's running Daze, which I haven't seen many builds do that. And again, even here, a 3/2 Delver is usually a roadblock against a weenie deck, but not with the Order out there. So you just keep one up and boom. And then sometimes, you cast your weenie afterwards. I don't happen to have it this time, but it's all good. So I represent, doesn't do it. Now I'm gonna try to draw out the counter. That could have been an error right there. I probably should have dropped Battle Screech first, try to pull out the counter, because then I can just flash it back, but it's nice to know what's in his hand. Obviously he could be holding them still because he's getting a little land screwed here, but I tend to be somebody that rubs in salt and wounds. I smell carrion, I go for the throat. Costs me sometimes, but I think the pie chart's way more in my favor, and that's what we were afraid of. I'm kind of glad it happened for this video. And look at that. Just to smack me in the face, it shows up a turn late. Ah, well. I think we'll still be able to pull this one off. This is the neat situation the player's in right here, because they kind of still have to cast stuff just to be able to block and stay alive, but they want to play the control element, but they can't because, they've got to get that blocker out there. That puts them in a tight spot. Now I do wish none of these flew. Wouldn't that be nice? Up next we've got Boros Kitty, Just Guide token version, a little bit of blue splashed in there. I helped Turbo Kitty in the design of this deck long ago, back when it was just Boros Kitty. It's been very interesting seeing its evolution. It's not my style, a little too grindy for my taste. But this is another one of those matchups. We started with one of our bad matchups and we're ending with one of them. Definitely winnable, but again, as you'll see on the stat sheet, about a 50-50. And really draw dependent. We're not fast enough usually unless we've got the nuts with, the Anthem effect to really put on a ton of pressure early, and just like us, they're able to gain enough life and stabilize with enough blockers that they can cause an issue. One of the biggest problem cards in this matchup is Core Sanctifiers. Most lists run 1 or 2 main, and it takes away most of our tech, and it puts you in an interesting spot. You bring in Journey to Nowheres to try to gain that tempo advantage against Skyfishers, knowing that they're probably going to drop and add to synergy mid to late game, which you're definitely going to get to. But then you also want to maybe dilute their enchantment removal, since you're going to want to be bringing in Lumithread Field. So it's an interesting dance. If you have access to the person's list, it helps a lot, depending if they're winning 1 or 2. But once Skyfisher gets on deck and they start bouncing that Sanctifier, that's a bad place for enchantments to be. I'm off to a really fast start here. Got him on the defensive. But never want to get my hopes up against this deck. I'm going to take out the quality, swing, and it's funny how many times decks like this, they treat that Order of Leitbur there. Well, speak of the devil, there it is. They treat Order of Leitbur as a problem card, and it really isn't. I mean, yeah, it has first strike. But there's not many scenarios where I lose it and I'm like, oh darn, in this matchup. There's so many ways to block. And also be aware of the error I just made. Had I made that first strike, there might have been a little bit different gameplay there. Often I'm not wanting to mana sink my mana into it. Very few times does that actually happen. So it's kind of a lightning rod in a good way, almost like a standard bearer. Hopefully no Boros Kitty pilots are listening to this and they let it live, but obviously it can get out of hand if I have the mana that I have out now. That's one of the neat things about the tokens design with Order of Leitbur in there, is that on top of Cenn's Enlistment being what's called a mana sink, where it's just something to do with your extra mana later on, I prefer to pitch it. Retrace is probably my favorite spell mechanic ever made. Not probably, it is. It rewards players for building a solid mana base early, and then when you have the extra lands later, you pitch them for the spell of said choice. Flame Jab, Raven's Crime. In this deck it Cenn's Enlistment, Ona's Grace, and others. Rarely see the green one, it's just so mana heavy, but boy, I sure hope they bring that mechanic back. Hopefully somebody from Wizards is listening. This is a very typical scenario of what happens in this matchup. You can just feel the tide turning in their favor. Unless we get Cenn's Enlistment on board or something to block with, we just don't have the quality in the air outside of our Anthem tricks to do much of anything. And most of them run a Dispel or two main, so there's always kind of a hesitance there. Which brings me to one interesting point. A lot of times it's wiser to cast your glorious Anthem effect, or whatever it's called, before you even attack. So you can tell, did they counter it? No? Okay, I'll swing. It prevents you from losing guys. I've seen it happen quite often where people unwillingly will just, oh, it's an instant, I have to do it at an instant speed. It's like, no, cast it as a sorcery, see what they do, and then swing. That little nugget of wisdom might help, but yeah, this one's over. But again, a lot of times this matchup comes down to time. And yeah, I could have scooped 2 minutes ago, but as you can see, it gets more interesting as I let the person over bluff, play too much. So there's a volume of creatures here, so all our life gainers are going to stay in here. Suture Priest, all these things are much better targets than Order of Leitbur is. Journey to Nowhere, these can go. They can stay. I'm going to lose 2 order. Prismatic Strands again. I mean, you wouldn't fault me for putting those main, would you? In this tournament, it definitely seems that way. I've got to respect Electrickery enough to bring in all 4 of the Lumithread Fields. And our 2 curve is a little heavy, so I'm just going to go for it here. We're going to get rid of the Journey to Nowheres, put back in the aggro. Got a nice curve going on here. Completely get rid of the rest of the orders. You know, Lumithread can still double his aggro, and Cenn's Enlistment really is going to pay dividends, hopefully. So I'm already down. Here comes the dreaded 4-1 league scenario, right? I'm sure you've all been there, where easy to go 4-0, and then that last one always seems to be the nemesis deck, doesn't it? And it's no different here. It's like, why couldn't I have drawn Delver once this tournament? It's like, it's supposed to be the deck that's out there everywhere, but... So this is yet another good sign. He's using a spell, a 1-for-1 spell on a creature. So it tells us he did not draw Electrickery yet. Again, free duress, and you're not even playing black. Now obviously they could draw it, especially with this deck, drawing a few cards a turn, but my biggest problem with Boros Kitty, especially when I was talking to Turbo Kitty about the initial design, is there was there's that critical mass of you're drawing cards that say draw a card, that draw cards that say draw a card. And at some point, you've got to kind of knuckle down and get to the meat of the attack phase. I think the new decks have struck a nice balance doing that. I've seen some decks really falter and come up short in that way, but here with the Prismatic Strands backup, again MVP in this matchup. You got to be careful not to fall for spot removal, as you'll see in a little bit. There will be a case where spot removal does show up, and I'm going to let it through because he might be trying to bait me into seeing if I'm going to crack the Prismatic Strands yet. But once it's in the yard, it's a very relaxing feeling outside of a Dispel or double Electrickery. You tend to feel like you got the game in hand, but again, it's a 1-point game at this point. Yeah, this isn't something we like to see. All this card quality. Actually, lack of card quality. So many of the cards he's drawing probably take 2 and draw a turn. So we're getting into the comfortable life zone here. Really like to drop a Lumithread sometime soon, but I think we're just going to go aggro. A Dispel here would really hurt. And I think he forgot about the instant in the graveyard. So now we got him down to 4 and a one-sided Wrath of God. And again, see, it almost cost him the game right there. That was the matchup. Okay, and we're off to round 3. I thought that last one was going to be it, but forgot this one went to 3 rounds. So he starts off right away with life gain. Got a decent hand here. Again, we're very happy to see 3 Prismatic Strands. Doesn't seem too aggro, but as I mentioned before, it's not likely that we're going to be able to just swing for the gates and have that perfect slay effect of white creatures flying through the air. We're doing decently here. So again, there's a good example. He Galvanic Blast a Suture Priest, so we know the odds of him having a Electrickery are 0 because he would have played him. We'll play a little bit more loosey-goosey here. Now I'm going to really respect the card draw potential here, and plus the block potential. Because Prismatic Strands is a wonderful combat trick. And what other deck can sit back and make somebody lose 4 life at instant speed? This is just a respect move. I've got extra in the hand. I want to do something with my turn. I don't want to completely time walk myself. Now I've got the insurance policy, especially against somebody that forgot that it was in my graveyard last turn. Who knows? Maybe he's on tilt, getting nervous. He's supposed to win this matchup, sort of thing. So there is where I let the Suture Priest go. It's a great card, but I've only got one set of backup plans there, and you know we're terrified of Electrickery at this point. We've got to get stuff online. So now this is feeling a lot better. I'm still able to gain a little bit life. Now I've got double Prismatic Strands available. So this feels a lot better. And plus I can block in the air and actually prevent. Now this is where I will play it. And again, I'm going to let it go. That one card could be it. It's not like we're at 3 life or something. I've got to win yesterday. Time's becoming a bit of an issue. It's still my favorite way to win a game of Magic anymore. So again, we let it go. We keep the insurance policy back. Coming through. It's starting to get a little dire for him. Here's another one. I like running 4 of those personally. The Anthem effects are great on defense sometimes. And here's a neat effect. You cast the Prismatic Strands first to make sure it doesn't get dispelled. Then you do the block. That's what I was talking about earlier. Don't always get in the habit of putting your men up and then having the spell get cast, because they can always get countered. I learned that the hard way. Nothing says you have to do it in a particular order. In fact, this deck rewards casting spells first and then attacking. Something I'm prone to do, but this deck actually, it's usually the correct play. So here we've got it. Let's see if he's got, I'm expecting another one or Dispel, and no. Again, who knows what's going on in this guy's world. Maybe he's on tilt, maybe he just forgot to see it again. God knows it's happened to me. Here's another one. Okay, now we're playing a real game. And just like the other game against Delver Angler, 1 turn shy again. I mean, I'd almost rather it be 2 turns away, because at this point it's just insulting how that's been happening. So can't say I'm that lucky. But again, we drew a land. In most decks that would be a terrible draw, but in this deck, Retrace to the rescue, all of a sudden we can mount an attack. This is looking like it could go either way here. But Birds to the rescue, Delta running Envelop, and now we've got some really superior numbers. Again, I'm going to cast this main. He doesn't have the Dispel, so now I know it's safe to run. Yeah, it's the one-sided Wrath of God, and this is it. So that was the final ending of that one. Went 5-0, and up next I'm going to talk about some of my stat sheets.
So there you have it. Tokens. 5-0. Ran into Urza, which is a very tough matchup. managed to grind through it, and the Jeskai Kitty, whatever Boros Kitty's deck that you want to call the last one, is usually a really tough matchup too, as it proved to be. But like most good decks, you can usually find a way to power through if you focus on the right strategies. Hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully here's to more to come.
Back to the stat sheet. Familiars is quite the nemesis in the matchup, and there's been a lot of articles written about its overpoweredness, and it is there. I just don't have the patience to play the deck. I have all the decks built, but you know, you have to play what your style dictates. And I've noticed that Cloud Shift is great against that. Don't overdo it against other matchups. If you're playing against a UR control deck that uses Firebolt and all these things, one or two might be able to come in, and that could make some sense, but overall, that's just there out of respect for familiars. Believe me, I've tried every single card under the sun imaginable there. It can also be good against burn. You know, you can bring in your spells and kind of 2-for-1 them on Standard Bearer if you want to focus that Fire Blast on one of them. Although I don't recommend it. Usually just Prismatic Strands is good there. Pretty much any sort of U-Swing, I-Swing combination, you're definitely going to want a combination of two, maybe all three Prismatic Strands in there. And don't ignore Order of Leitbur even if your opponent isn't playing Swamps, because that extra mana can really hold off the majority of the meta game on the ground. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I know it's been a long one. Hopefully quality made up for it, and I'll see you next time. This is deluxeicoff signing off.